Would you like to make a podcast? Spotify has a way to let you make one easily, distribute it everywhere, and even earn money, all in one place, for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit right from your phone or computer, so you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify, and everywhere else podcasts are heard. And video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free. You know, ever since I discovered Spotify for Podcasters, I've enjoyed sharing my favorite stories with children around the world. If you've ever thought of starting your own podcast, download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to spotify.com/podcasters to get started. The Story of Cinderella. Once upon a time there was a young girl who lived with her widowed father. Eventually her father remarried. His new wife had 2 daughters of her own. She was mean and spiteful to the young girl, and so were her daughters. They made the girl do all the housework, eat scraps, and sleep by the fireplace among the cinders and the ashes. Because she slept in the cinders, they called her Cinderella. One day, a letter arrived from the palace. All the women in the land were invited to attend a grand ball, where the prince would choose a bride. The evening of the ball, anticipation filled the entire kingdom. Cinderella's stepsisters were very excited. Her stepmother was sure one of her daughters would marry the prince. She made Cinderella work all day to make them as beautiful as possible. Cinderella washed and curled their dull hair, she cut and shaped their ragged nails, she stitched their ball gowns, and she polished their dancing shoes until they looked brand new. Cinderella longed to go to the ball herself, but her stepsisters just laughed. "You go to the ball, but you don't have a pretty dress," said the elder stepsister. "How ridiculous! You were always covered in soot and cinders," laughed the younger stepsister. Tears ran down Cinderella's face as she helped her stepsisters into their dresses and jewelry. At last they were gone, and on their way to the ball. Cinderella sat alone by the fireplace where she cried and cried. "If only I could go to the ball," she said through her tears, "and be happy for just one night. I wish I could go." Cinderella had barely finished speaking when there was a sparkle of light in the dark kitchen. Cinderella turned around, and there stood an old lady with a kind expression on her face and a wand in her hand. Cinderella stood up. "Who are you?" "Don't be afraid, my dear. I'm your fairy godmother. You have suffered a lot in your life, my dear Cinderella, but your happiness is important too. You shall go to the ball, just like your sisters." Cinderella stared in amazement at the fairy. Quickly, she dried her eyes. "Really? I can go to the ball?" she asked, barely daring to believe it. "If you do as I say, all will be well," the fairy godmother answered. "I'm used to doing as I'm told," Cinderella sniffled. The fairy godmother told her to bring her a pumpkin, 4 white mice, and a black rat. Cinderella hurried to the garden to pick a pumpkin. She found 4 mice in the kitchen, and she caught a rat sleeping in the barn. With a wave of the fairy godmother's wand, the pumpkin turned into a shiny golden coach. Cinderella gasped in astonishment. "It's beautiful," she said. "But who will drive it?" The fairy godmother waved her wand again, and the 4 mice became 4 handsome white horses. She waved her wand a 3rd time, and the rat turned into a tall coachman. "How wonderful!" Cinderella cried. "But how can I go to the ball in these rags?" She waved her wand, and Cinderella's rags turned into a beautiful ball gown. Glittering glass slippers appeared on her feet. Cinderella looked beautiful. "Now, off you go," her fairy godmother said. "But remember, this will all vanish at midnight, so make it home by then." Cinderella climbed into the coach, and it whisked her away to the palace. She had never been happier. Everyone was enchanted by the lovely stranger, especially the prince, who danced with her all evening. Cinderella enjoyed herself so much that she completely forgot her fairy godmother's warning. Suddenly, the palace clock began to strike midnight. Cinderella picked up her skirt and fled. The worried prince ran after her. She ran down the palace steps. She lost one glass slipper on the way, but she did not dare stop. Cinderella jumped into the coach, and it drove off before the prince could stop her. On the final stroke of midnight, Cinderella found herself sitting on the road next to a pumpkin. 4 white mice and a black rat scampered around her. She was dressed in rags and had only a single glass slipper remaining from her magical evening. "Even if it was a dream, it was a perfect dream," she said to herself. At the palace, the prince looked longingly at the glass slipper he had found on the steps. He could not forget the wonderful girl he had danced with all night. "I will find her, and I will marry her," he said to himself. So the prince took the glass slipper and set out to visit every house in the land. At last, he came to Cinderella's house. Her 2 stepsisters tried to squeeze their huge feet into the delicate slipper, but no matter what they did, they could not get the slipper to fit. Cinderella watched as she scrubbed the floor. "May I try?" Cinderella asked. You didn't even go to the ball," laughed the eldest sister. "Everyone may try," the prince said. Cinderella sat down. Her foot slipped easily into the glass slipper. The prince took Cinderella in his arms. "You are the one. Will you marry me?" asked the prince. Cinderella's stepmother and stepsisters were furious. "It can't be her. She's just a servant. She dresses in rags." But at that moment, the fairy godmother reappeared and turned Cinderella's rags back into a fabulous ball gown. Cinderella took the other slipper from her pocket and slipped it on her other foot. "Yes," Cinderella said. "Yes, it was me. And yes, I will marry you." Much to the disgust of her stepmother and stepsisters, Cinderella married the prince with huge fanfare. Her stepmother and stepsisters also had to do their own cleaning from that day forward. And the prince and Cinderella, well, they lived happily ever after. Thank you for listening to Bedtime Stories. Please make sure to follow us for more stories and, of course, share them with a friend. Until next time, good night.